Hey friends, it's Becky L. McCoy, and this is Sucker Punched. Today I'm chatting with my friend Heather Dixon. We talked about what it's like to have a chronic disease that changes the way that you live, and a lot of the conversations that we have on Sucker Punched are about grief of some sort or another, and I really enjoyed chatting with Heather because she was really real about grieving the loss of what she thought her life would look like and how much it's had to change because she suffers from this chronic disease. So she'll explain it a whole lot more, but I just really hope that this is going to be encouraging to you as it was for me. And if it is encouraging to you, just think about maybe there's somebody else that would be encouraged to, and share the episode with them. All right, here is my conversation with Heather. Hey everybody, I am here today with Heather Dixon. Heather, why don't you share a little bit with us about a difficult season that you lived through?
Well, hey Becky, thanks for having me on, first of all. And so let's see, a difficult season. I'm going to take you back 2 years ago, in the fall of 2015. I was a yoga teacher. I was teaching about 11 classes a week. My son was in, he was in third grade at the time. I have one son. He's my only child, and he was in third grade. I was teaching yoga. Had this great. I love teaching yoga. I had this great lifestyle with that, and then I ended up in the emergency room with two aneurysms. Two aneurysms, a partial kidney infarction. I had a miscarriage, and then my carotid artery ruptured. So all of those things, right, yeah, all of those things happened over the course of about 2 months, like back to back.
Wow.
And we knew the miscarriage was coming. I found out earlier that summer that we were pregnant, and then at 9 weeks I found out we had lost the baby. Mm-hmm. And I opted to miscarry naturally because I'm a hippie and wanted to do that at home. And my doctor was like, yeah, if you can, if as long as you don't go too far into the second trimester. So we knew that was coming. And so that happened. And then these huge emergency room things happened. And, so the doctors are like, what is going on with her? And, we ended up going through a bunch of different tests. On the outside, I was super healthy as, a yoga teacher. I taught people how to, live and be healthy for a living. I was the poster child for health. And, after all these things started happening, my doctor started piecing together some parts of my other medical history in 7 years ago where my colon ruptured, which at the time they just said, oh, this is just a foul ball. It's just a fluke. And then they started piecing together the history of my mother's medical history. She died at the age of 37 from what we knew up until now was this just really mysterious illness and occurrence. Mm-hmm. So they recommended me, after my carotid artery ruptured, they recommended me for genetic testing for a genetic connective tissue disorder called Vascular Ehlers Danlos Syndrome. It's a connective tissue disorder that makes my blood vessels, arteries, and organs prone to spontaneous rupture. So I went in for the testing a few months after all those things happened, and of course they came back positive that yes, this is what I have, and I inherited it from my mother. It's what she had as well. It's what took her life at the age of 37. So that was a hard time. Those were some really, really, really difficult months. Mm-hmm. The hardest part of the vascular EDS diagnosis is there is a shortened life expectancy associated with it. So there's no cure or treatment. It's genetic. And there's really nothing that can be done for it. And the average life expectancy is about 48 or 50. So we were kind of hit with all these things, this complete, whoa. just a crash course in anxiety, for me, and how to process all this. There's a lot to process, and still is. Mm-hmm. So that was my hard, a really difficult time in my life that we're still, we're still walking through, and we'll always walk through that. But that's our reality now.
So when you got your diagnosis from the genetic testing and you kind of realized like, oh, this is what my mom had, how did you react emotionally?
So, a couple of things. I think the silver lining to it, I'll speak to the blessing first and then to the grief. I think the blessing was our family now had some closure over this because, I was 11 when she died, and this was in 1988. This was on nobody's medical radar. Nobody knew what vascular EDS was. They still don't. It's incredibly rare. And a lot of doctors are still like, I don't know what that is. So I think there was a bit of a blessing to now have some answers to, oh, this is what was happening to her body, and this is why her body kept failing. And to now know and put to bed questions like, was there medical negligence? Did we do something? Was there something that we just didn't see in her? It kind of put to bed a lot of those questions that my family had carried for so long. So that was really good. I think it also, that's the blessing part of it. I think the grief part of it is also realizing that her life was still, was very brief. And that when all of this was happening to me, I had just turned 38, which was 1 year past where she lived. Wow. And so that was a big deal to process for me, to realize that I had now surpassed the years that my mother had walked this earth. It's a grieving process. And I think that, it's real. I don't know, it's real curious to watch the mind kind of process that you will likely deal and quite possibly die from the very same thing that took your mother. And I'm going to be real honest with you and say that I don't have a ton of words for that right now. Yeah. It's a grieving process. It is, in some really bizarre way, I almost feel even more connected to her. She was always my best friend. She was an amazing mother. We had a wonderful relationship. So, there is this really weird, bizarre sense that like I am that much closer to her and to her memory. But then there's also this profound, wow, and I think about women who, deal with breast cancer and, the awareness that breast cancer is, a lot of it is genetic. And then, women that have walked through that with, with their mother, and then they deal with it with themselves. I don't know. I'll be completely upfront with you and say, I don't have a whole lot of words for that other than, it is a grief process, and it's just hard. I think that the word that kind of covered how I processed all of that, though, was anxiety. I had a crash course in it for a couple of months. I was those were really, really dark days. And I lived with this anxiety of just not even trusting my body, just knowing that my body itself was not very good at keeping itself together. Ultimately, that's what, EDS is the deal. There are different types of Ehlers-Danlos. And, my particular type manifests itself with arteries and organs and visceral tissue and things. But at the heart of it, it's just, it's a connective tissue disorder, and your body just isn't very good at keeping itself connected. And so I walked through several months where I did not trust myself to move. I moved, like just any movement, physical movement, getting out of a chair, walking across the neighborhood.
Total paranoia.
Yes. Like basic movement things. I just was like, my body is going to blow up, and I don't know how to live and move in my body, which was like the total opposite of what I had walked through as a yoga teacher. So It was just a totally new experience. Although I'll say that, this is one of the ways that God kind of protected me. And there were a lot of ways he prepared me for that, but this was one of them. So, I mean, the practice of yoga, I taught in a secular environment, I taught in a Christian environment. And, the practice of yoga really is just about listening to your body and just listening to what it has to tell you. And so I got really good at that. And, I had a doctor after our diagnosis say, I said, well, what do we do now? And they're like, well, you can't. You just, you have to just listen to your body. And, if your body is speaking up and saying, and you're feeling like something doesn't feel right, then you need to get it checked out. And I was like, you know what? I can do that. I'm actually really good at that. So that was just a way that God kind of prepared me, for that. So I doubt I'll ever go back to teaching yoga, but that was a skill that I developed that now, serves my health well, because I just am pretty good about noticing things that are off. Yeah. And it was just kind of a gift to see how God kind of prepared me for that physically, to be able to once again walk in confidence and comfort in knowing that, my body is okay. And it is a little bit more fragile than what I knew it to be before, but it's okay. So
yeah. What did it feel like? What was your visceral emotional reaction when you were first diagnosed?
I think that my visceral reaction was fear. Not so much for me, but for my son. Fear. Fear, it just kind of covered everything. I think I had, my greatest fear was just this promise of major medical events. And there is that promise with vascular EDS. I've had two of the big three. There are big three. There's a lot of major medical events that could happen with vascular EDS, but they're the big three ones that they say, well, these are the ones that usually end your life in some way. And I've had two of them. My colon, right? My colon has ruptured, my carotid artery has ruptured, and then the last of the big three is a aortic root dissection. And that one, thankfully, I've not experienced. I know a very few number of people in the vascular EDS community that have and have survived that, but the vast majority of them do not. So I think that I had, a visceral fear of pain, just physical pain and those, major medical events happening. And I think the emotional fear was, like I said, really more for my son, because my mom, I was 11 when my mother died. No one can tell me that process is easy. Or, that growing up without, your parent is, that's not an easy, I know exactly what that's like. And so I worried, for my son. I worried for my husband. My husband is the most extroverted person on the planet. He needs someone to be there at home welcoming him. He needs people. And so, the idea that I am here today and could be gone tomorrow it's just scary. No one ever wants to think about that. No one ever wants to face that reality. But I know a little bit of your story, and I know, some of those emotions that you process through death and pain. And no one wants to think about that. But when you have that reality right in front of you every single day, it changes your perspective on things. So fear really became my BFF for a while, and still rears its ugly head, here and there. It's just something that I struggle with.
Yeah. So what did you struggle with most so you said fear was like that initial reaction. What else did you struggle with kind of over the course of the last 2 years, and how have you decided to handle that?
So I think that there were a couple of things. I think number one is anxiety. Fear and anxiety, I think, just kind of go hand in hand. You can't really talk about one without talking about the other. For me, at least, from my experience, and from my experience as a yoga teacher and seeing that in my students. It's just, anxiety is really rampant in our culture. And so I don't think you can talk about anxiety without talking about fear. So for me, the physical panic attacks were a reality. The emotional anxiety reactions were a reality of just not, trusting that things are going to be okay. So, and I will say that how I moved out of that is really, it really is by the power of the grace of God. He was just so good to protect my mind. And I say that because I have experienced grief and death at other times in my life, like when my father died almost 9 years ago today, actually. I did not handle that well. And, I'm not going to say that was a lesser grief or a lesser pain, but I know that God was really, really protective over my time, and not that he wasn't protecting me then. He was. I just was too bitter to see it. Mm-hmm. But I think that God has just been really good at saying, okay, you could focus on these things. You could focus on all the death and the doomsday and the grimness of this nasty diagnosis, because it is. But he said, here's what I want you to do instead. I have a job for you. I have things for you to focus on. And, I had been a ghostwriter for years. As I was a yoga teacher, I was also ghostwriting kind of behind the scenes and, just working and doing nerdy tech stuff on website building and, things on my own. And you look back now, and again, that's another one of those ways that God just kind of prepared me for this, because my grandmother is such a huge rock of faith in my life. And when all this went down, I was at her house and she looked at me and she said, you know what? Because, there's so many things I could not do. Still, I have so many limitations now. And she said, well, girl, you can still write. So get to it.
Yeah, that's great.
Right? I know. She's like, I wish she could meet. She's like she's the wisest woman I know. And I was like, oh, okay. Okay. And so that's what I did. I started writing, and that's how my online ministry was born. I had a friend at church who had recently gone through a miscarriage, and I didn't know her well enough to reach out to her personally, but I thought, I've been through that and I can speak into that. And you know what, by the way, why don't women speak into this more often? Mm-hmm. Why do women, carry that as something private? I didn't tell anybody, except for my, our closest friends and family knew, but we didn't tell anybody. And I was like, this is promoting a lie that you are alone in your suffering. Mm-hmm. This like and I'm not judging any woman's decision to walk through it publicly or privately at all. I still would probably do the same thing privately first. But I thought, this is promoting a lie that, suffering, the things that we suffer on a daily basis, we have to do alone. And so mm-hmm. I wrote this post, it's like about miscarriage. Here's what I learned about my process of miscarriage. And I knew that would be a very non-invasive way to encourage this friend at church. And what was born out of that was this online writing ministry. And I had been writing and teaching Bible study for, years in the past. And I kind of came back to that. And came back to that experience of saying, these are the things I can't do, but this is what God needs me to focus on now. And the gift behind that was, instead of me mentally, waking up every day and saying, I have a genetic, incurable, and terminal disorder, I wake up every day and say, I have a job to do. And, mm-hmm. God has given me a purpose to walk through this grief and to maybe encourage someone else and hold their hand as they are trying to figure this out too. Because look, it's hard. Right. Life is hard. How can we do this together? Mm-hmm. So, I think that God kind of turned pain into purpose and is continuing to kind of blow my mind with that. It's a blessing to me. I say it selfishly because it's a gift to have something else to focus on. Mm-hmm. It's a gift to not just live in this vascular EDS world. I do, and obviously we have to be wise and smart about decisions we make with my health now. But it's just He's just good to say, you know what, this is bad, but I can redeem this and I can make this good, and that's what He's doing now. So yeah.
Friends, season 2 of Sucker Punched is almost over. I cannot believe it. It has been so fun to be able to talk with these different brave people and to share their stories with you. I'm already starting to dream about what I want season 3 to look like, and it would be really helpful to get your feedback. So you can send me an email, podcast@beckylmccoy.com, and let me know what kind of stories would you like to hear. Is there anyone in particular that you would love to hear on this podcast? So let me know. Just send me an email or on social media at BeckyLMcCoy. Send me a message. Let me know who you'd love to hear on Sucker Punched. Also, it would be super, super helpful if you would log on to Apple Podcasts app or wherever you listen to your podcasts and rate and review Sucker Punched. That way, as we finish up this season and start to get ready for a new season, it really helps us to know what people think and what you love, and it really helps new listeners to find the podcast too. So like when you're searching for new podcasts, suggestions for similar podcasts and whatnot come up because of the rating and reviewing. So that's super helpful. And I think that at the end of the season, I might just draw a random review from the Apple Podcast app from iTunes and maybe send you a little present. So yeah, get on that. No pressure, but it would be really helpful and I'd really appreciate it. All right, back to my conversation with Heather. You've mentioned this a little bit, but maybe you could kind of like summarize what are the good things that have happened in this really difficult time? Because I was having a conversation with someone yesterday about, in doing this podcast, what have I learned? What are the things that I kind of hear over and over again from guests? And one of the greatest things is these brave women that I talk to have decided that life doesn't happen at them, but that, they get to choose how to respond and that nothing is completely dire.
Right.
So what are those good things that you've seen?
So I think the biggest thing has been a perspective shift for us. Obviously, we were able to witness God move really tangibly during all those scary unknowns. And, just before all the medical emergencies started happening 2 years ago, God drew me to the book of Joshua. I was praying in a really deep prayer time, and, I felt like he was telling me to get ready. And so I looked at the first 2 times those words appear in the Bible, and we find them in the book of Joshua. And so I spent several weeks studying the book of Joshua, and then all these medical emergencies happened. So I had taken all those truths from the first 5 chapters of Joshua into that unknown, scary time. And, because we kind of had already planted those truths from God's word into our heart, we were able to more quickly recognize his movement as we were walking through the unknown, which was a really big blessing. And, people say this often, I think, they look back at times of suffering and trial and great need. And over time, I think the perspective as you look back onto them changes to one of, there's a sweetness to it. And I think it's because God's presence is so much more tangible than in times of just peaceful contentment.
Right.
And so that is a blessing to be able to look back and know that we were watching God move, that we could recognize, how he was there with us in each moment. We could have a whole nother podcast of me telling you details of where he was in every test and every procedure.
Well, share some of those with us, because I can imagine some people are sitting there like, well, that's cool, but guessing it probably wasn't like a pillar of smoke and a pillar of fire, or like a burning bush, or like, a crazy wind moving through the hospital. Like, what does it mean to sense God's tangible presence?
Yeah, that's a good question. You're right. I've never seen a pillar of smoke. So I think, one of the first things is the people that we met. So the very first time I ended up in the ER, they actually sent me home, and the aneurysms were kind of brewing, but they didn't catch it at that visit. So I ended up just staying in the ER for a couple of hours, and then they sent me home. And while I was there, I met a nurse, and we ended up talking about yoga. She had, taken yoga. She had used to go to the center one of the centers where I taught. And so we just had some common ground on that. And then the more and more we talked, we found out, she actually loves Jesus too. And so we got to talk about, two of, my favorite things in my life. And she ended up, giving me her contact information, and we shared contact information, and that was that. So then flash forward to, several weeks later or several months later, once we knew what the diagnosis was, and she reached out to me, and because she had seen us again in the hospital, and she said, "You're not going to believe this. I knew there was a reason why I met you that day. My best friend has Ehlers Danlos syndrome."
Oh, wow.
And this, right? I mean, this was when I met her, vascular EDS, that just wasn't even a thing. I just finished the miscarriage process at home, and they just thought that I was probably super dehydrated and had some type of infection because of the miscarriage. And vascular EDS wasn't even on the radar at all. And so when she found out later that I actually had that, she said, "I know that's why I met you on that day." And, my visit to the ER served no purpose medically. The only purpose, looking back now, was so that she and I could be put in touch with each other. And when she sent me that email, I was very much in a place of I was a part of no support group. All of my doctors said, "We have nothing for you. We don't know how to treat this." Yeah. And we can't treat this. There is no cure. I was literally told, prepare your bucket list and live your life well. This is your prescription. And so I didn't know anybody that had EDS. I'd never heard of it. And so for her to reach out at that moment and say, "Hey, I have a contact for you. She's my best friend. She's also a nurse. Reach out to her." And so I did.
Wow.
And from that connection, I was able to start building other connections with other people that have vascular EDS. That was one thing. Another moment, one of my favorite moments in the hospital, and this is one of those that I look back on, it was just such sweetness, was we were there in, I think this was in between I think I had the aneurysms and the kidney infarction, but it was between that and the carotid artery rupture. And so it was still lots of tests being thrown every day, because the doctors were we have no idea what's going on with this woman. And so they put me, they didn't really, they had no idea where to put me, what floor to put me on, how to classify me. It was just I was just some crazy chick with these medical things. And so they put me in this really abandoned unit. It was kind of an overflow unit. And I don't think there were any other patients on my hall. It was just me. They kind of opened up this closed wing just so that I would have a bed to stay as they kept tossing these, crazy tests at. And it was super quiet. You couldn't find it. I don't know, because I was obviously in the room, but my family members will say, and my friends will say now, that they it wasn't in a normal place, a normal wing. They were we have no idea how to get to where you were. Right. So, so it was in this super abandoned place, not a lot of traffic, no other patients, not a lot of people coming in and out. And, I just saw my nurse, and then very occasionally would see a doctor come through to talk to me. And so one morning we were there, and my husband was with me, and I was just so tired and so weary and so done with being poked and prodded. And I asked my husband to give me my Bible and my quiet time book, and I just started doing that on my own. And my nurse came in. I'll never forget. Her name is Milka, which is a biblical name from the Old Testament. And she looked down. She said, "What's the good word for today?" And I said, I just started reading, and it was it was one of the Psalms. I think, I don't remember off the top of my head. Anyway, but I started reading from the Psalms out loud, and I was very weak. My voice was really timid. I was barely speaking above a whisper, because I was just so tired. And she stayed there in the room and listened. And then a few minutes later, another hospital employee, and I think she was a nurse, came and stood by and stood there in the room. And all this time, I am reading the Bible out loud. I'm just reading from a song out loud. And another one came. And another one came, and another one came. I don't know where these people were coming from. I really don't. I don't know why they were on this unit. That's what I was explaining, that we were on this abandoned unit. Right. There's no reason for these people to be here. And I think, all in all, we had 5 people standing there just listening to me very quietly and timidly read God's word. And, you have those moments in your life where you, they're supernatural in a way that you just can't explain them. And that's how that moment was. It was the hair on my arms was standing up. It was just this very tangible, peaceful presence of Jesus in that room with us as I was reading God's word. I'll never forget it, and will never probably replicate it in my life. Yeah. And one of the dudes that was standing there, when I got done reading, I just, finished reading, and he looked me straight in the eye. He had a foreign accent. I don't even know his name. And he said, I don't know why you're here, but I know that God is going to heal you, and he is going to take care of you. And then he left. It's okay. And so, it was just one of those, our time in the hospital and throughout the diagnosis was filled with those types of just in your face presence of God. Heather, I am with you. I am not forsaking you. I have got this. Just put one foot in front of the other and come with me here. I'm going to get you to the other side of all of this. Mm-hmm. And that is what held us steady. So, that to me is a huge blessing in all this. As difficult as it all was, that sweetness of his presence was just that. It was sweet and it was precious. And, it gave us glimpses of what we want as people who are striving to live with Jesus. I crave that kind of connection. And it was what he fed us with. It was our daily manna. It was what he fed us with to keep us focused on him and remembering that, just like I studied in Joshua a few weeks prior, I am with you. I do need to be strong and courageous, but God is with me always. Does that was a lot, really long.
That's okay. Question. So kind of continuing on what you just said, how have you decided to live bravely as a result of your diagnosis and having this chronic illness?
Yeah. So, 2 things. Number one, I think that, my online ministry is all about courageous living, and that courage really became a hot word for me, and not just because I plucked it out of Joshua 1:9, but because I think it takes courage to live on this broken earth. And I'm not talking about the type of courage it takes to jump out of an airplane or to ride the greatest roller coaster at an amusement park, because that is totally not my jam. I'm not doing either one of those things. I am talking about the kind of courage it takes to put 2 feet on the floor on a morning when you do not like your story. Mm-hmm. And I think that is the most courageous type of living that we will ever do. And so that is the type of choice that I'm making, is saying, this stinks. This is not what I want for me. This is not what I want for my family. This is not, the process that I want my husband and I to walk through, as we know that our time together is limited. This really, really stinks. But with God's help, I am going to put one foot in front of the other, and I am going to keep moving forward. That's a choice that we're making. And the other one is, and this is kind of as a twofold answer to your previous question about some of the good things that have come out of it, is that what God is slowly showing me is that it's what I have been given is a perspective shift. And I think that most people, a lot of people, search their entire life to find a way to live with gratitude for every single moment, and to be able to live in each present moment, and to experience each present moment as if it's priceless. Mm-hmm. I think that's what, a lot of people are really searching for. And that is what God has given us with this. So yes, this diagnosis is nasty and scary. But on the flip side of that, we are so thankful for every single moment that we have. Life is so precious. Mm-hmm. And so my family chooses to live that out every day. And, bucket list living is kind of become a thing for our family because of what the doctor said, prepare your bucket list and live your life well. And for us, bucket list living is not just about making decisions to do big things and see things you've never seen. And sure, there's a measure of that we address as a family, but it's really about how can we wake up every day and say, I am thankful to still be here. Mm-hmm. I'm going to put 2 feet on the floor on this day, and I am going to make a memory. How can we make a memory together? How can we find laughter? And oftentimes, Becky, that is like found at the ice cream shop, the local ice cream shop. Right. I'm not talking about doing giant grand things. I'm talking about, what are some choices we can make in this day to make.
Our conversation got cut short because Heather's Wi-Fi just completely stopped working. But I'll just share this one last thought with you from Heather, how she really wants to encourage other people going through a similar situation.
I think the first thing is that I would encourage them to learn to make sustainable choices in their daily life. And what I mean by that is making choices that are not going to expend their energy or their resources, and choices that also honor the things that are the most important things in their life. So, your family, your friends, your relationship with God. What the short story of that is that you end up saying no a whole lot. Mm-hmm. I end up saying no to a lot of things that, that I normally would have said yes to, but I say no a whole lot more than I say yes. And that looks like a sustainable choice for me. Mm-hmm. I think that that has to be a priority. And it's one thing that I tell my vascular EDS friends all the time.
So it turns out that 2 transformers blew in Heather's town, while we were having our conversation. So our conversation had to stop there, but I caught up with her later just to kind of find out some fun facts about her to share with you since we weren't able to finish recording the conversation. First of all, I just love how she just talked about making sustainable choices and that she wants to live for a really long time, and she wants to give her family as many years together as they can have. And so she has to say no and create boundaries. And don't we all? Don't we all really need to? We may not have the same type of physical consequences as someone with a chronic autoimmune disease, but we all need to create boundaries to live our healthiest lives for a really long time. So anyway, I asked Heather the fun questions. So her favorite food or snack is chocolate chip cookie dough paired with fruit, especially bananas or apples. Yum. Or that's what she's loving right now. Her favorite food is her grandma's chicken and pastry and the 14 vegetables that go with it. I love the fact that most of my guests on Sucker Punched, their first answer, favorite things, and their second answer, the food one, everything is about food. It's awesome. I love that people, I think there's probably going to have to be a disordered eating episode eventually on Sucker Punched, because that's a real thing, and food does not need to be the center of everyone's lives. But food is something to be enjoyed, and my guests seem to really enjoy food. So that's awesome. Number 3 is, what is she doing to take care of herself? And she said daily power naps, or at least resting daily. And number 4 is, how is she living brave? And that's conquering her fear of Facebook Live. And Heather, that's real, right? It's terrifying to do Facebook Live, but it's also a really fun way to connect with people. So speaking of connecting, you can find Heather's social media information in the show notes. Mine is there as well. You can find me everywhere on social media at Becky L. McCoy. I'd love to hear what you thought of our conversation. There are only a couple episodes left in this season of Sucker Punched, which is so exciting. So I will talk to you next week. Bye.